of NSFAS, Andile Nogongo, and the chairperson of the board of the NSFAS, Ernest Khosa. And we also have the DDG responsible for the universities, Dr. Thandi Lewin, and also the DG of the Department of Higher Education, Mr. Gweb Skonde. At this point, I will hand over to the Minister, Minister Ntshavheni, to take us through the cabinet decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, DG, and good morning to all South Africans. This is the statement of the cabinet meeting that took place on the 10th of March 2021 on the attacks and killings of police officers. Cabinet condemned the continued attacks and killings of police officers as not only barbaric, but also as a threat to national security. Members of the South African Police Service and other law enforcement agencies, including private security companies, put their lives in the line daily to keep us safe, and they also deserve our support and protection. Cabinet welcomed the swift police investigation that led to the arrest of a suspect in connection with the murder of 2 Western Cape police officers on Sunday, 28 February 2021, who were also robbed of their firearms. All acts of criminality, including murder, will not be tolerated, and perpetrators will be hunted down and brought to book. Cabinet also commended the South African Police Service action in seizing cocaine with a street value of over 500 million rands from a fishing vessel in the Saldanha coast. The operation was led by detectives from the Organized Crime and Narcotics Unit in collaboration with other SABC units. SABC was also commended for seizing 400 vials equivalent to 2,400 doses of fake coronavirus vaccine at a warehouse in Germiston, Johannesburg, Gauteng. Officers also recovered fake masks and arrested 3 individuals. Cabinet urges the public to avoid buying fake vaccines from unscrupulous peddlers who endanger the lives of unsuspecting citizens. Through the Department of Health, government has started to implement the free vaccination program that will reach all South Africans who volunteer to be vaccinated. To date, phase 1 of the vaccination program at designated vaccination sites throughout the country has covered over 100,000 health workers. On the unfortunate death of Mr. Mthokozisi Edwin Ntuba in Braamfontein, Johannesburg yesterday, Cabinet is saddened by the unfortunate death of Mr. Ntuba, who was 35 years old, a husband and a father, who was killed during the Wits University student protest in Braamfontein in Johannesburg on Wednesday, the 10th of March 2021. And government has expressed its condolences to the family, friends and colleagues of Mr. Ntuba, who was also an employee of the Department of Human Settlements. The Independent Police Investigative Directorate is already conducting an investigation to determine the circumstances that led to the death of Mr. Ntuba. Cabinet urges the police to exercise restraint whilst ensuring public order during protest and never to use live ammunition. On African swine fever, an outbreak of African swine fever has been reported in 2 farms in the Mfuleni in the Western Cape. The Western Cape Department of Agriculture has imposed a ban on the sale and movement of live pigs from Mfuleni to limit the spread of the disease. The African swine disease is a contagious disease that affects domestic and wild pigs, but does not affect people. However, Cabinet calls for extreme caution to be exercised to prevent the spread of the disease to other parts of the country. Farmers are advised to pre-cook any swine for at least an hour before feeding it to pigs to ensure the inactivation of the African swine fever virus and other diseases of concern. On gross domestic product figures for the 4th quarter of 2020, Cabinet noted the GDP figures for the 4th quarter of 2020 that were released by Statistics South Africa on Tuesday, 9th of March 2021. The real GDP grew by 6.3%, largely as a result of further easing of the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. The outcome reflected strong growth in household final consumption and manufacturing output. As a result, for the full year of 2020, real GDP contracted by 7.8%, 7%, a better outcome than expected. The manufacturing sector grew by 21.1% in the fourth quarter of 2020. 9 of the 10 subsectors that recorded increases were led by food and beverages, motor vehicles and parts, and metal and steel products, while trade growth was 9.8% was led by retail trade, motor trade, catering and accommodation. Agriculture posted its highest annual growth of 13.1% for 2020 as a result of the favorable weather conditions and improved performance in the grain, horticulture and livestock subsectors. On an expenditure basis, household final consumption expenditure increased at a rate of 7.5%, led by restaurants and hotels, food and non-alcoholic beverages, I must emphasize, and recreation and culture subsectors. Gross fixed capital formation increased by 12.1%, led by the increased investment in transport equipment and construction works as road, passenger and freight activities improved and civil engineering works resumed. Cabinet remains confident that the economy will recover through the prioritized health interventions as well as continued collaborative efforts of government, business, workers and communities in implementing our economic reconstruction and recovery plan. And also the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, delivered the virtual keynote address on Tuesday, the 9th of March, to the 9th annual Proudly South African Buy Local Summit and Expo that was held under the theme, Localization as a Driver of Economic Growth. Proudly South African is an agency of the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. The summit was live-streamed across multiple online and social media platforms to allow wider participation in the discussion. A virtual expo allowed companies to showcase their products and services in a short video that provided an online meeting hub for those who want to trade. Cabinet calls on all South Africans and businesses to support our homegrown products and services, particularly during this economic recovery period, to boost economic growth and job creation. We must all buy local. The Deputy President, David Mabuza, visited the Biovac storage facility in Midrand, Gauteng on Tuesday, the 2nd of March 2021 as part of the work of the Interministerial Committee on COVID-19 Vaccines, which oversees the successful rollout of the vaccination program. The Biovac Institute, a Cape Town-based biopharmaceutical company, is jointly owned by government and private sector. It was formed in 2003 to be responsible for South Africa's immunization programs in vaccine development and logistics of storing and distributing vaccines to various vaccination sites. Over the years, Biovac has developed sufficient capacity to store and distribute vaccines. Cabinet was satisfied with its contribution towards the vaccination rollout program and the work being done with other pharmaceuticals to produce COVID-19 vaccines. Cabinet calls on everybody to remain vigilant and continue practicing health protocols of wearing a mask when in public spaces, regularly washing our hands with soap and water, or using 70% alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Also maintaining social distancing of at least 1.5 meters and avoiding large gatherings. The prevention of the possible third wave is all in our hands. And the downgrade to level 1 lockdown, it doesn't mean that the coronavirus disease is no longer with us. On cabinet decisions, the first decision is on the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Cabinet received a briefing from the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, on the current funding shortfall challenges faced by National Student Financial Aid Scheme. These challenges have delayed the finalization of the registration of first-year university students. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the challenge of the scheme, some of this being the extended academic year and the number of students qualifying for funding due to parents having lost their jobs. To solve this challenge, Cabinet approved additional funding, and the details of which will be unpacked by Minister Nzimande when I finish with the Cabinet statement. Cabinet has directed that further work must be done to find a more sustainable approach to fund students for their tertiary education. Cabinet remains committed to ensuring that all deserving students are not excluded due to lack of funding. Cabinet also approved the draft position paper on land administration and land tenure reforms in communal areas for further consultations with relevant stakeholders. The proposed reforms provide a legal framework to initiate the process of transferring communal land to persons or communities whose tenure of land is legally insecure. These reforms will also expand the communal asset base to empower communities to engage in cultural, social, and economic activities of their choice. The consultations will culminate in the convening of the envisaged National Land Summit. Cabinet also received a briefing by Minister of Health, Dr. Zwelini Mkhize, and Minister of Finance, Mr. Tito Mboweni, regarding contract negotiations for vaccine acquisition with different pharmaceutical companies. Cabinet considered some of the difficult terms in the contracts that are not aligned to the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act of 1999, Act Number 1, and acknowledged the deviations already granted by National Treasury in the interest of the lives of South Africans. The deviations included prepayment provisions to ensure that South Africans have access to the vaccines as soon as possible. Cabinet supported the efforts of the National Treasury and the National Department of Health to continue with the negotiations and to ensure quick access to vaccines for all. Cabinet approved the extension of the national state of disaster to 15th April 2021. This is done in terms of Section 27, subsection 5C of the Disaster Management Act of 2000, and this is Act number 57. The Act is Disaster Management Act of 2002, Act number 57. The public is urged to continue adhering to all COVID-19 health measures and restrictions to prevent the spread of the virus. On the bills, Cabinet approved the publication of the Occupational Health and Safety Bill of 2020 for public consultation. This bill seeks to amend the Occupational Health Service Act of 1993, Act number 85, and align it to international trends. It also seeks to strengthen the safety measures of workers in their respective workplaces. The bill introduces the provisions that empower employees to withhold their labor should they feel the environment is dangerous and unsafe without being victimized by the employers. Cabinet also approved the submission of the Housing Consumer Protection Bill for tabling in Parliament. The bill repeals the Housing Consumer Protection Measures Act of 1998, Act number 95. The proposed amendments include expanding the protection afforded to housing consumers, including for repairs, renovations, alterations, and additions to existing homes. The bill also proposes transformational programs in the home building industry. A number of inputs have since been received from the industry stakeholders through public consultations. The bill will go further public consultations with the parliamentary process before it is passed into law. On upcoming events, is the World Water Day. South Africa will join international community in marking World Water Day on Monday, 22nd March 2021. The day raises awareness on the global water crisis and focuses on the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal number 6 of clean water and sanitation for all by 2030. The Department of Water and Sanitation has launched the Save Water campaign to remind all South Africans that every drop counts. Despite the recent good rainfall, the water scarce country is still susceptible to sustained droughts which are exacerbated by climate change. Cabinet calls on South Africans to use water sparingly, as our wasteful behavior today could impact future generations. Let us be a responsible generation that took the future into our collective hands by turning off the tap of water wastage. On congratulations, Cabinet expressed its congratulations to Ms. Tshepo Faith Cooper, a local medical scientist from Pathology Lab 1 who discovered a COVID-19 testing antigen. The antigen is part of the COVID-19 test kits being rolled out by Lab 1 laboratories in Khayelitsha, Western Cape, and Midstream in Gauteng. Pathology 1 Lab purchased the test kits in partnership with Prince Amon Moagi of the Bakhatla in a tribe in Northwest Africa, his Africa's Capacity Investment Group, and Braun Capital. On condolences, Cabinet expressed its condolences to the family and friends of Ms. Karima Brown, an exceptional and veteran journalist and activist. Mr. Peter Mahlari, an entrepreneur and UPSA deputy CEO, who also held various executive roles at a number of top South African businesses, and including the SABC. And Mr. Azfari Dick Rarushai, a liberation struggle veteran. Rarushai was a member of the Black People's Convention and served as its publicity secretary. He was a member of the Northern Transvaal Action Committee, an affiliate of the UDF, and an underground activist of the African National Congress military wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, under the Northern Transvaal Rural Missionary. On appointments, and all appointments are subject to the verification of qualifications and the relevant clearances. Cabinet approved the appointment of Ms. Mamukhala Jennifer Musekene, the Deputy Director General, as Deputy Director General, Chemicals and Waste Management in the Department of Environment, Forestry and Fisheries. I'd like to then invite Minister of Higher Education and Training and Science and Innovation, Dr. Blade Nzimande, to expand further on the matter of the National Financial Aid, Student Aid Scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Ntshavheni, and the DG of GCIS, Ms. Phumla Williams. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Let me also greet our Deputy Minister and all the officials who are here, and also to recognize those who have joined us in being in watching this press briefing, who are very important stakeholders in our Department of Higher Education and Training. Our senior management, the CEO of NSFAS, the leadership of the Universities South Africa, the South African Union of Students and the TVET College Students Association, the TVET College Governors Council, leadership from unions. And ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to first thank my cabinet colleagues and the president of our country, President Ramaphosa, for providing funding support under trying circumstances to keep the commitment that we have made as government during Minister Mbowene's budget speech on the 24th of February 2021. And I quote that government remains committed to ensuring that deserving students are supported through higher education, unquote. Thanks for Minister Ntshavheni for underlining this as part of the cabinet decision. Before I outline the implications of this and the details on this commitment by government, let me also start by reflecting, as Cabinet has done, on the tragic incident that took place yesterday in Braamfontein, where a man lost his life in the midst of a public protest. I also join in expressing my own sincere condolences to the family and friends, and I have directed Wits University Council and management and the relevant law enforcement agencies to provide us with an explanation on how this tragedy happened. As Minister Ntshavheni has said, Cabinet met yesterday and discussed the matter of the funding shortfall, which I had reported earlier in the week. And the particular issue under discussion was shortfall in the funding for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, NSFAS, for 2021, which has delayed NSFAS in being able to communicate funding decisions to students and institutions for first-year students. Cabinet agreed that funding should be reprioritized from the budget of the Department of Higher Education and Training in order to ensure that all deserving NSFAS qualifying students are able to receive funding support for the 2021 academic year. Further reprioritization can only be considered as part of the medium-term budget process of government, which takes place later this year. This decision has been taken in the context of funding cuts and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Following this decision, NSFAS will be able to release funding, and the registration process at public university can indeed now continue as planned. Non-NSFAS qualifying students have been affected by these delays, as universities have agreed to extend the registration period to ensure that students without funding decisions would not be prevented from accessing a place that they qualified. We agreed with the Vice Chancellors on Monday that the registration period is extended for first-time entering students until the end of next week. That a comprehensive review of the student funding policy of government is urgently required, and has instructed that the Department of Higher Education and Training immediately commence with this work and report back to Cabinet. The purpose of this process will be to look carefully at the funding requirements to support students in financial need in the post-school education and training system, to model the holistic requirements of students, including those from poor and working class backgrounds, as well as from those in the category we refer to as the missing middle. Government is very concerned about the issue of growing student debt in the system, as are the universities. This is an issue that will also be considered as part of the policy review that Cabinet has decided upon. Some of the demands that are being received by government and universities relate to the debt of students who may not be funded by NSFAS, but who are struggling to register because they have not been able to pay debts, but are doing well academically. In some instances, universities have already made arrangements with some students to sign acknowledgement of debt agreements. In this regard, I will be engaging with the university leadership to explore ways in which we can try to ensure that final year students who are also performing well and are on track to graduate are able to register for their final year through such acknowledgement of debt arrangements. What should be clear from the above is that government is firmly committed to implement the policy of providing fee-free and fully subsidized higher education support to students from working class and poor background, whilst also putting a sustainable mechanism in place to support students from the so-called missing middle income brackets. I will now provide further details about NSFAS funding for 2021, as well as on the start of the 2021 academic year. As I have said, NSFAS will now be able to release funds for new students qualifying for NSFAS bursary support. As I already said on Monday, continuing students who meet the qualifying criteria have already been allowed to register, those who are recipients of NSFAS. This process is extremely urgent, as some universities are already starting with their academic programs and others will be commencing soon. I appeal to institutions and to NSFAS to ensure that this process is completed as smoothly as possible. I would also like to appeal for calm at our institutions of higher learning. Where there are matters of dispute and grievances, structures are in place for SRCs and institutional management to engage, and I urge that student leaders and institutional leaders make use of these mechanisms to resolve the problem amicably. We cannot afford at this time to enjoy disruption to the 2021 academic year, which is already starting later than usual due to the extended 2020 academic year and the delayed National Senior Certificate results. The 2020 academic year was a difficult year for everyone. Students and staff in our public institutions had to adjust to remote forms of teaching and learning, and institutions had to manage the academic year during different phases of the national lockdown. I commend the institutional management teams, staff, and student leaders in our institutions for their hard work during the 2020 academic year. I also wish to extend my special congratulations to the students who continued their academic programs despite the challenges of COVID-19. I also acknowledge that yesterday I received communication from the South African Union of Students, which represents all our public university SRCs, outlining a number of demands of students. I will respond to this communication as soon as I'm able to do so. And as the ministry, we're committed to engaging with student leadership as well as with other stakeholders. Now that the issue of the funding shortfall has been addressed, we will then be able to finalize the funding NSFAS bursary guidelines for university students, and these will be finalized within the next week and released to institutions as soon as possible. It should be noted that the changes are being kept to a minimum in order not to affect the administration of the DHET bursary scheme in public institutions. However, it is important that I clarify the core parameters of NSFAS funding policy for 2021. NSFAS funding is provided primarily for the funding of students completing a first undergraduate qualification. In the past, NSFAS has provided funding for some limited second qualifications in key areas. Students who are already funded on this program will be able to continue as long as they meet the academic criteria. However, there will be no funding available for new entrants on second or postgraduate qualifications, as postgraduate programs ordinarily are funded through application to the National Research Foundation. The only exception is that students who have completed higher certificates and gain access to a degree or diploma program are able to receive funding if they meet the academic criteria. The department will continue to work with institutions and other funding agencies to expand the funding opportunities for students who do not qualify for NSFAS, in particular in scarce skills areas. In this regard, we will also engage further with the SETAs and the National Skills Fund, where support may be available for programs in particular areas, and indeed also to address areas of postgraduate funding where possible. In short, government is able, through the SETAs and the National Skills Fund, to provide bursaries in scarce skills areas, even for students who would ordinarily not be recipients of NSFAS. The following is applicable in relation to the DHET NSFAS bursary scheme for 2021. Tuition fee and accommodation fee costs are provided for in line with the guidelines of the Department of Higher Education training. To the CPI-linked wide of 4.7% for tuition and 6.7% for accommodation. Institutions must note that no funding can be provided by NSFAS in excess of these incomes, and neither can such costs be passed on to NSFAS bursary recipients. I wish to thank the university councils and management for their understanding in adhering to these conditions. I must also urge that all our universities must stick to the agreed enrollment plan in line with the ministerial statement on enrollment planning for 2020-2025. I will provide further details below. All NSFAS qualifying students on the DHET grant scheme, that is, those students who were registered prior to 2018, will be subject to the funding cap of 98,700. In respect of student allowances for students on the DHET bursary scheme, the following is applicable. All students receive the learning material allowance, which remains at 5,400 for the 2021 year. This allowance can be utilized by students to purchase electronic devices to support their study, in line with the applicable university policies and schemes. Some institutions will make use of the NSFAS process for the provision of laptops to students. The living allowance, which is provided to full-time students in contact study, remains at 15,000 Rand for the 2021 academic year, and the incidental allowance remains at 2,900 Rands for students receiving, for the students who are receiving the 15,000 Rands, the incidental allowance is included there. This is provided to students who live in catering accommodation where their meal costs are covered through the bursary. UNISA and distance learning students who are taking an equivalent full-time course load and who qualify for NSFAS will also be eligible for the 2,900 Rands incidental allowance. The travel allowance, which is provided to students who live at home or in accommodation that is not accredited and therefore do not receive an accommodation allowance, remains at a maximum of 7,500 Rand for the 2021 academic year. In respect of the allowances provided, the policy provisions outlined in the 2020 guidelines will remain in place for 2021. I must indicate that the student funding policy of government, which is provided to support students from poor and working class background, that is from families earning less than 350,000 Rands per year, is a comprehensive one because it provides support for both academic access and success. We know that while access to appropriate support for students in full-time study is one of many factors that support student success, it is indeed one of the most important. This is why government has committed such substantial funding to support students in public TVET colleges and universities. I do need to say, Program Director, that for instance, universities in 2018 were supported with 17 billion Rands of NSFAS bursary. And 2020, it went up to 28.2 billion Rand, almost doubling it in 2 years. NSFAS funding in TVET colleges doubled between 2018, where it was 3 billion Rands, and in 2020, it was 6.5 billion Rands. This shows government's commitment to supporting students from poor and working class backgrounds to attend universities and colleges. In many respects, student support, by the way, exceeds the earnings of many workers earning either at minimum wage or even below minimum wage. Government also has to ensure that it is able to meet other critical social obligations, including social grants, support for school nutrition programs, training of unemployed youth, and effective support to the health system. I do acknowledge that this period has been stressful for many prospective students wishing to enter post-school institutions as well as for their families. I hope that today what I have outlined will provide some assurance of our commitment of government to addressing the funding needs of students from poor and working class background. I look forward to a successful and peaceful academic year. And once again, urge all stakeholders to ensure constructive engagement around all issues they may face. I need to say this, Honorable Program Director, before I conclude, because this is important. That 578,000 learners wrote the grade 12 exam in 2020. Of these, 210,820 achieved a pass at bachelor entry, and 150,600 at diploma level. The available spaces for first-time entering students for 2021 in the public university system is 184,315 for the system as a whole. I am also pleased to announce that through the National Skills Fund and the Agricultural SETA, we will be providing for the first time bursaries to approximately 4,000 students who are studying at agricultural colleges in our country using NSFAS criteria. Such students are not being funded by NSFAS. This funding will ensure that we continue to step up support for black small-scale farmers, as well as to support and train agricultural extension officers. We will be working closely with the Department of Agriculture and Agrarian Reform to also work towards restoring physical infrastructure in agricultural colleges. In conclusion, let me state that our vision and mission of the Department of Higher Education and Training is that of a South Africa in which we have a differentiated and fully inclusive post-school system that allows access to relevant post-school education and training. With these words, I wish you all a safe, healthy, and peaceful academic year. Let us all remember to keep all COVID-19 health and safety protocols intact. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think at this point we'll take some questions. Ignatius?
Thank you, TG. This question goes to Minister Ntshavheni, as from Stembile Cele from Bloomberg News. On the difficult terms in vaccine contracts mentioned, is the minister able to offer any details on this? What are some of those terms? Are the concerns Cabinet has around those terms delaying procurement of vaccines in any way? Did Cabinet get any indication of how much longer it will be before negotiations are concluded and the terms of all contracts with manufacturers are made public? And I have Tula Sizwe from ENCA. Did Cabinet discuss the issue of returning students with historical debt and the question of whether or not universities should be allowing them to register despite the outstanding amounts? A question will be asked the fact that the budget could not reprioritize shows that this was always a solution that was available. Why did it have to take immense frustration and protest on the part of students and the death of a man for this solution to be implemented? And I have Ntebo from SABC. We seem not to have learned from the fees must fall. Protest against financial exclusion has now become an annual ritual for poor students. What is the government doing to avoid this annual occurrence, which normally leads to the destruction of property and waste of the much needed time for students to focus on their studies? And I have another question, DG, from Christian Duplessis, Network 24. It's directed to Mr. Nzimande. Is free higher education for deserving working class student in South Africa feasible, considering the large yearly increases in the number of students funded by NSFAS? What is the amount that needs to be reprioritized for NSFAS to fund students for 2021, and where will the money come from? Thank you, DG. That's the only questions for now.
Thank you. There was one question at the back, so that the ministers can take every. Just say from which media house.
Okay, thank you very much. From Newsroom Africa, my name is Palana Pakhadi. I don't know if you will allow me to get in a few questions there, ministers. But the first one I think I would like to give to you is to the Minister of Higher Education. Did not the department foresee that there will be such a challenge at the peak of COVID-19? I mean, the government was granting grants to corporates and big companies. Did they not know that there is education? I mean, the first years are coming up in the next year so that they can save up for that. That'll be the first ones. And Minister Nzimande, you're giving us a brief here today, and students have been calling for your communication directly to them. You do have the means to call a media briefing, but you choose only to be part of the cabinet briefing here today. And students tell us that all they want is adequate communication following your unwelcome remarks of NSFAS shortfall. So why are you failing in that regard to communicate directly to the students so that they could avoid such communications? And the last one, Minister in the Presidency, Acting Minister in the Presidency, what is Cabinet saying when they hear through the State Capture Commission of how billions were squandered, mismanaged at times, and the irregular expenditure at NSFAS in recent years, but opted to wait until the protest action arises before making such decisions, critical decisions on education and on the education sphere to assist the first year entrance in the university?
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you for the questions. Let me start by the questions around the difficult contractual terms with the procurement or acquisition of vaccines. We have indicated in the statement that there are requirements for prepayment that ordinarily, in terms of the provisions of the PFMA, they are not allowed. But National Treasury has granted the exemption to allow the prepayment. We are confident that the negotiations will be concluded speedily, and the mandate that has been given to the negotiating team is sufficient for them to conclude speedily so that the acquisition can continue. But we must also indicate that already other contracts have been signed. The contract with Johnson & Johnson has been signed, and the terms have been agreed with Johnson & Johnson. And part of the discussions that we are having, and this is not limited to South Africa, it's across the world, the contractual terms are not to be made public, and part of the discussions and some of the agreements is how that gets managed, given that the public funds are being utilized, and how that those public funds get accounted for. And within the Johnson & Johnson agreement, those arrangements are sufficiently in place, and that's why the contract has already been signed. We are confident that the next round of contracts that have to be signed will be signed as speedily as possible. And we need to also clarify on the next round of questions that deal with the student funding, that the matter of the funding gap for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme the discussion was not triggered by the protest of students. When Cabinet became aware, and which this information was brought in by the Minister of Higher Education, that there's going to be a funding gap, we started to say, what are the mechanisms, given the limitations of the budget, that can be made in place to make sure that no student is excluded. And Cabinet was having its own normal Cabinet meeting yesterday, and having that full submission that was tabled by the Minister of both Higher Education, supported by the Minister of Finance and the Department of National Treasury. Unfortunately and tragically, Mr. Ntumba had to be killed, which is very regrettable. But the discussion in Cabinet was already underway, and the discussions was not triggered by any protest by students. We remain committed to make sure that all deserving students who are underprivileged, who do not have financial means, do not get excluded because of the status of the families where they come from, because we cannot build an equal South Africa if your access to government services and access to opportunities are determined by the status or financial position of your family. And that is the position. We have also, as Cabinet, and I've mentioned it in the statement, that we have directed both the Minister of Finance and also the Minister of Higher Education and Training to make sure that the table proposal, not even during budget process, immediately of how do we sustainably fund education in South Africa, because the funding of higher education in South Africa is not just only about funding. What happens to the students who are graduating and completing higher education? We have a highest rate of unemployed graduates in this country. So therefore, it's not only an issue that is restricted to funding, it's an issue that also goes to what type of training are we giving, how do we enable our students not to be job seekers but job creators, because a future South Africa, it depends on South Africans being equal contributors to economic development of this country. And I'll deal with the last question and before I hand over to Minister Nzimande, the question around looting and irregular expenditure. In terms of the looting and irregular expenditure, part of the discussion we've been having in Cabinet has been, one, the State Capture Commission must be given its space to do its work. The law enforcement agencies must also do their work to recover the looted funds or looted resources of government so that they can be directed to appropriate use. It doesn't matter whether it's at National Student Financial Aid Scheme, it's at the Department of Small Business Development, it's at Transnet, it's at ESCOM. Wherever looting has taken place, we need the resources of this country to be returned back. We have started to see the return of those resources with the Mackenzie paying back the money and other institutions refunding us of that money, because we want to make sure that that money is appropriately allocated and utilized for the benefit of all South Africans. And in terms of the work that has to be done to make sure that the National Student Financial Aid Scheme is restructured and make sure that the looting that takes place there is dealt with, I'll hand over to Minister Nzimande to deal with that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Ntshavheni. And thanks also for the manner in which we have covered quite a number of issues that were raised about student funding. But can I start, Mrs. Pumla, by pleading with the SABC television? They are running a wrong role on their screen. They are saying Minister Nzimande says there will be no funding for first-time entering students. That's not true. That's not what I have said. In fact, what we are announcing today is that NSFAS qualifying students who have been admitted to institutions are going to be funded. So can they please correct that, because it's likely to cause us undue problems, because it's not true. Now, let me also add that on the question which was asking the amount of money to fund students in 2021, they've now moved from just under 36 billion rands last year, and they're going to be 42.1 billion rands this year. That's the money we are going to be spending as government for 2021 on NSFAS. Now, the issue of student debt, I would like that we also break this down. NSFAS students who have been funded since 2018, they have no debt, because the bursary is paying for all their needs. So we must be clear about that, which means the NSFAS continuing students who started in 2018 or thereafter, they actually have no debt. The students who really have debt is NSFAS students who were funded prior to 2018. In the past, we have contributed in relieving those students by government absorbing some of that debt. But in addition, we had negotiated with the institutions that in the case of those students with acknowledgement of debt, they must be allowed to continue and pay as we move as we will have much of pre-2018 students in our system. The other category of students that is owing is what we call the missing middle. Those who do not qualify for NSFAS funding, as government funding is for poor and working class students. These are the students that I was talking about earlier, that some universities have entered into an arrangement with some of such students. And we are saying as government, we are also going to be engaging institutions, in particular to prioritize those who are doing well and are doing their final years, such that they are able to sign acknowledgement of debt, be allowed to register so that they can complete and will be able to pay once they actually start working. But in addition, Cabinet has taken the government working with National Treasury. We must start a process. Already as a department, by the way, we've started the process. We are not from scratch, to look at how we address, how the issue of missing middle students is addressed. And we will be engaging with student leadership and all other stakeholders right from the word go, as we continue to actually work at finding a permanent solution to that challenge. I think Minister Ntshavheni has covered the issue that it didn't take the death of a person for us to address this. I don't have anything to add. Now, this annual ritual, I think it was terrible, of protest every year. We are concerned about that. But I must say that government has done a lot to actually arrest that challenge, because all NSFAS students do not pay anything at the beginning of the financial year. And for the rest of the year, by the way, they also get even money for registration. That has contributed a lot towards stabilizing the situation. I've dealt with those students who actually do not qualify as how we intend dealing with that. On consultations, I must say also that, by the way, Sister Khumbudzo, just as the last point, since the eruption of COVID in our country, I have established a COVID-19 task team, a ministerial task team, chaired by our Deputy President, which has been meeting right through with all the stakeholders, the trade unions, the student organizations, the vice chancellors, the college principals, to monitor the situation and together tackle all the challenges, including these very looming challenges of funding that, as the sector, we have been dealing with together with everybody, and we are still committed to continue this engagement so that everybody is able to make a contribution and is aware of what we are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ministers. We usually take 2 rounds, so we will allow this last round. And I think I will start with Ignatius again.
Thank you, DG. I have only one question from Atandi Wasaba from Maiden Garden. With the full knowledge, which is directed to Minister Nzimande, with the full knowledge that there are a certain number of students that will be entering into higher education every year, why was there no plan earlier to address this? Why are discussions on prioritizing funding only taking place in February, when the government and the Minister of Higher Education knew months ago what the situation would be? Thank you, DG.
Thank you. Is there no other? I think it is going to be the last round. Minister, can delegate.
Minister Nzimande, if we still have you on the network, can you indicate so that you can respond to the question? Otherwise, we'll invite the DG of the Department of Higher Education and Training to come and assist if the minister's connectivity is bad.
I'm here, Minister. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I'm very much
Yes,
here.
go ahead.
Yes. I think this question you had already largely addressed, Minister Ntshavheni, that we did not start addressing the problem now. We started addressing the problem as early as towards the end of last year. The reason why it has taken us to this extent, you must bear in mind that the academic year has actually finished late. And it was only right towards the end of the academic year that we could get the full scale of the nature and the amount of the shortfall. We've been monitoring this, we've been aware that there is going to be a shortfall, and we've been engaging inside government around the shortfall. But it only became clearer once we were right at the end of the financial year for most of our institutions, which was January, February, to then say, here is what the figure is likely to be, which has landed at the figure that now we've spoken about, which is just over 6 billion rand. So to give an impression that we've allowed this problem to be at this stage, we've been doing nothing, is completely incorrect. We were projecting, but the actual figures only became clearer recently once all our institutions were moving towards completing the academic year. Thank you very much.
I think we've come to the end of our media briefing, and let me take this opportunity to thank the two ministers and also to thank all my colleagues who managed to come and cover the event, and we adjourn.
All right, that was the briefing post the cabinet meeting. I just want to start off by apologizing for the incorrect strap that was on your screen. We did hear from the Minister, Dr. Blade Nzimande, about the parameters of